Welcome to Anti-Fraud in Action. I'm Margot Cella with the Center for Audit Quality. Our topic today is balancing big data and data ethics during COVID-19. My guest is Dana Lawrence. She's the Senior Director for Compliance and Internal Control at Azlo. Welcome, Dana.
Hey, Margot. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. So just to level set for our audience, give us some idea of the key concepts around data ethics and data governance, and tell us why they're so important now.
Great. Let's start with the definition of big data. Big data is comprised of extremely large data sets that can be analyzed to give us insight on human behavior and interactions. Big data is also so large and complex that it can't be processed by normal processing software. So that's the technical definition of big data, and I want to dive into a real life example to get us to start thinking about how pervasive data collection and data use is. So if you just take a moment and think about, even in the last 24 hours, how you have either transmitted or shared data, and thinking personally, this could be something like updating your LinkedIn status, checking into Facebook, any type of social media. I made a purchase on Amazon last night. Amazon's tracking all that data, including my browsing history, sending text messages to family members. I used my Starbucks app this morning. They're collecting all that data on me and my preferences. So when you think about it, it's really quite pervasive, and that data collection starts to add up. And that's really that concept of big data. And later in the presentation, we'll dive deeper into data ethics, which is really the sustainable use and management of data, ensuring that people are properly protected. And then data governance is how data is organized within an organization to ensure appropriate outcomes for data use.
So as you said, big data is pervasive. So obviously there are benefits that companies see because they're investing all this money in it. What are the primary benefits of big data?
Sure. So I think it could be anything from enhancements to consumers on the, maybe smaller end. And then evangelists will say that big data is going to change the world. It's going to solve major human problems. So let's dive into an example. On the consumer benefit end, an example I have is my local grocery store, Fred Meyer. I'm part of their membership club. So they track all the different purchasing that I do over the course of a quarter. And then they send me very specific and targeted coupons back to me. So it's a little bit eerie, but it's also very helpful. Fred Meyer's knows that I like my organic lettuce and the type of, produce and products that I want. So it actually helps my customer loyalty to be getting that specific, targeted coupon. Another example I wanted to share, which could help solve a problem more related to climate change and energy usage. My neighborhood is participating in an energy test grid program. So the data is analyzed over energy usage. And when it's identified that there might be a really hot day, our energy company will reach out to us and offer a rebate if we decrease our energy usage during that time. So it allows the energy to be more efficiently shared and utilized across the grid. So right now it's a test program, but it could help identify ways to influence customers' behavior in regards to energy use.
Interesting. So what is data ethics, and why is it even needed?
Data ethics is really concerned with the responsible and sustainable use of data. On the surface, it looks like data is very fair and unbiased, and we can rely on it 100%. However, there really are some instances where data analytics, machine learning can introduce bias, or it can result unintended outcomes that are not favorable for companies, organizations, or people. An example of why a data ethics program is needed is around a situation that occurred to Target. Target has a robust data analytics program to track what their consumers are purchasing. And from that purchasing data, they can make conclusions about who that person is and what their future buying habits might be. So in this instance, Target was able to identify that a customer was highly likely to be pregnant based on their purchases and sent the customer coupons for baby-related products. And on the surface, that seems very reasonable. The unintended consequence is that this consumer was a high school student and their father saw these coupons coming in, and he was not aware that his daughter was pregnant, so it caused a real commotion. And I think that event created some reputational damage for Target and helped consumers kind of rethink how companies are using our data about us in a way that might not feel great.
So is that example an exception to the rule, or does it happen much more frequently than we're even aware?
So I think there's lots of books and podcasts and TED Talks on this topic. So I'd encourage everyone to continuing their own research on this topic. I think that the use of data and the potential misuse of data or unintended negative consequences related to data and machine learning is very pervasive. One other example is a program that was released in Chicago, and it was an app you could use on your smartphone to report the presence of potholes on your street. And the intent was very, very good. Let's get the potholes fixed. Let's give anyone access to report these. The actual outcome of this program was that folks who had higher incomes and were more affluent and lived in more affluent neighborhoods had more access to owning and using a smartphone and being familiar with technology. So it skewed the pothole reporting towards those neighborhoods, and neighborhoods with lower socioeconomic or even elderly populations where cell phone penetration or smartphone penetration is much lower. It didn't give them the kind of the equal and fair treatment in reporting that really the program intended to. So I think it's important to call out that there can be some bias and unintended consequences.
So I can tell you that I know that companies are using AI and machine learning. Certainly the audit profession is, in terms of the audit methodologies that they're working on. Tell us a little bit about that and the pros and cons.
Sure. I think that machine learning is the use of artificial intelligence that allows computers to access data and to use it to start learning from themselves. That concept, when I first heard about it, sounded very far out. I think an example that brings it more down to earth is the example of a computer that learned how to play chess and can now beat pretty much any human chess player. And I think that's an example of machine learning in that in the beginning, the computer didn't have any data sets to learn from, so it couldn't beat a human. As it started to play more games, it would remember every move that was made and the outcome. As it started to learn from more and more chess games, it became smarter and smarter, and it could quickly process the likelihood of every potential move, where a human, even an expert, wouldn't ever be able to compare with the processing power associated with that. So I think that is an interesting way to think about machine learning and how a computer could actually become smarter on its own.
Okay, so now I want to switch to another hot topic these days, which is COVID-19. What new technologies are being introduced, used, whatever, to address or help combat this pandemic?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. There are new technologies being contemplated in the attempt to combat COVID. And I want to just call out that this is a world crisis. So I think we have to really balance the need for privacy with what is best for our society. And so there's been a lot of difficult and passionate conversations in regards to this. One of the primary technologies that has been introduced is contact tracing apps. So essentially, if I had an app, and Margot, if you had an app, we could indicate whether or not we had COVID or if we had symptoms. And then in an anonymized way, if I came into your proximity, it would let me know or you know if you were in proximity with someone who is infected with COVID. So really the intent is to help keep people safe, help people to understand when they may have been infected. It's also a way to track movement to see if policy decisions have been effective, if people are actually abiding by social distancing, some of those other topics. There has not been unanimous adoption of these by any ways. I think there's some real privacy concerns. I did want to call out Google and Apple came together to come up with some new data security practices that could be implemented with contact tracing. And that's something that's definitely worth reading about if you're interested.
Yes, I have read, and in fact, lots of companies are trying to do it with people who show up at the office. And it may not necessarily tell you that Margot has COVID, but it may say, the HR department will be able to say, you were in contact with somebody for more than 15 minutes who has tested positive, but they won't tell you who it is. So what are the ethical implications of these technologies?
This is a great discussion topic. I think there are many ethical implications of the technology. As I mentioned, we are in a world health crisis, and also people's right to privacy is something that many people value very highly. So the ethical implications are around, if this data is being collected to help our communities, how much data is being collected? Is it only the data that's actually being needed? How long is it stored? Is it going to be used for some commercial or other type of governmental purpose that is not what it's explicitly stated for? I think there's quite a few concerns. The general response to that has been attempts to anonymize the data and aggregate the data and be more transparent around the sharing. There's still been a lot of lessons learned in this area.
So what are some of the potential emerging risks that companies should be aware of with their data?
I think this is a great opportunity for companies to revisit their information security policies. With so many of us working from home, organizations should be looking at any increased risks in that area, have manual controls that folks performed in the office change now that people are at home. How is the data being secured in a work from home environment? Are people accessing confidential data from a secure system or from their own personal smartphone? In addition to your employees, I recommend that companies look at what their third parties are doing. Many of us share confidential data with third parties, and we're relying on a certain standard of security control. What is happening now that those folks are working from home? And then, not to make you feel too paranoid, but what are their subcontractors doing with their employees that are working from home that have access to your company's data? Because we are still on the hook for protecting that data.
Wow. So what can companies do to help mitigate these risks? Are there some tips that you can give us on enhancing your data ethics and governance programs?
Sure. In specific to the information security, I think you should look at your information security risk assessment, ensure it's updated to reflect the new COVID environment, and then take any remedial action steps as needed to address that risk. In regards to data ethics, I think that data ethics is still a leading edge topic. I work in financial services, so I have some compliance and legal guidelines in place, such as GDPR and CCPA, among others. There's also the reputational risk to think of, how your company is using data and how customers or consumers could feel about that. I think really the foundation of a data ethics program is also closely paired with data governance. So thinking of what type of data you're collecting, the life cycle of the data, where is it collected, where is it transmitted, where is it stored, how is it deleted? I think that's a key foundation of it. And then also thinking about, is the collection in line with your company's privacy policy? And is how you're using this data free from bias? Do you have an appropriate model risk management program? And really, we could go on and on, but I think those are some good high-level topics for folks to look at their data ethics and data governance at this point.
Before we leave, can you give us what you would consider the key takeaways that people should be aware of for balancing big data during COVID-19?
Sure. Again, I think that data ethics is really a leading edge topic. I don't believe that our regulation has caught up to the ways that data is being used in the world. continue to do your research, continue to reflect on how data ethics could impact your organization, particularly with regards to COVID. Be thinking about if your organizations are involved in the collection of any data, ensuring that the privacy and compliance regulations are complied with, and then taking a close look at your information security programs in regards to working from home.
So thank you, Dana. This was great information. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Margot, so much. It was a pleasure to be here. Take care, everyone.
This is Margot Cella for Anti-Fraud in Action. Thank you very much for joining us.